allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I do not see at this time our legal counsel on the Zoom.
It's not on yet, and Robert is getting ready to get on.
Okay,
So, which tells me that also that Mr. Williams is still not available for executive session. So,
okay. So since we're moving into the approval of the agenda, and we don't have the legal counsel here for that executive session item, is there consent to go ahead and remove executive session from the committee agenda today?
Yes,
So-
Madam Chair, for me.
Do you want a motion to amend the agenda or we don't need it?
If you could, please.
So I move that we approve the agenda as amended with removing of executive session. Are we going to try and do it later or just remove it at this point?
Yeah, we're going to try to do it later.
I second that.
Thank you. And for discussion, we'll try to get that on the next agenda because I think we already are going to have some additional things roll over to another meeting. So we'll try to get that on there. So I'll call for the vote on that.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye as well. Okay, so the agenda is approved with the removal of executive session. We'll move into. Okay.
I move we approve the agenda, the meeting minutes. No. Yeah, committee meeting minutes of November 7th, 2022.
To a second.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on those meeting minutes? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
okay,
unanimously approved minutes. And item B is the next item. This is facility use for funerals. And I did see in board docs that there was OE8 added. Was that correct, Robin?
yes, I put OE8 so that you could see what we already have in policy for facility use. And I think Robert is trying to jump on in a few minutes. But our practice has been, we have allowed funerals at schools, but they are not to have an open casket. And we've had funerals at schools, in our schools, one, because of, some of the churches have been too small, or the large, like the last one we have, it was a teacher that was at the school. So we do have, I would say, memorial, the casket has been there, but it had not been open. And I think there was an issue with the last one that we had, that the casket was open. And we had it in, the funeral was in the cafeteria. So this is why they're asking for a policy to be put into place so that we can be consistent across the board.
Isn't there an AR, Robin, on facility use that addresses funerals? I'm just trying to pull it up right quick. But I'm pretty sure when this came around a year or so ago that there was an AR.
I'll try to see if there is.
If there is an AR, we have to have a policy for it. Yeah. I can go in. Let me go into.
It's the AR OS 29 under section 5, rules governing the use, and then wait, no, it's under 5 subsection D. The following conduct is prohibited. Subsection 8, that funerals will be considered on an individual basis, subject to the approval.
You said it's OS?
OS
Yeah.
29.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll pull it up.
Section 5, subsection D, subsection
Okay,
8,
OS 29D8.
5D8.
5D8. Oy.
Yeah,
Let's
it's
see.
There's some metadata there.
You know what?
Hold on, I think, let me go see who's down in the media center. I think this is Robert. I have to go.
Okay.
Give
We'll
me a
just continue discussion a little bit. I just had something that I'm thinking, I'm gonna think out loud here is in looking at this and how comprehensive this is, we may need to do a cross-reference or a check to make sure that besides just funerals, that there's nothing else that's not being addressed from.
Well,
they are in the-
subsection D, subsection 8 prohibits private use, including but not limited to weddings, family reunions, and baby bridal showers. It does say funerals will be considered on an individual basis, subject to the approval of the superintendent or his or her designee. And as I recall, when this came up before, I don't know what the issue was, that basically the thought was it was in case it was for school personnel
Mhm.
and not for sort of anyone in the community to use it type of thing.
Yeah, I don't remember who brought it forward last time. Was it Mr. Smith?
That was my instinct, but I'd have to go back and look. This has been floating around there. I think it's come up to policy before. I don't know what the
Did, and at that time, we didn't think that there was,
Can you hear us?
yes.
Okay. Mr. Smith is the one who brought it forward the last time.
Okay.
And then I don't know why we need policy, because it seems to me we basically have a policy that the superintendent will set regarding use. I don't think we need a specific funeral policy.
I think the only thing that we would need would, if anything, would be a kind of a catch-all for making sure that any use of the facilities is abiding by other regulations and things like that. Because I think probably what the concern is if there was an open casket in where Robin said the event was, that could be going against some DHEC regulation or something like that is all I can think of.
Well, and there is section 8. I love this. I feel so legal. OE 8.7, which is all about develop and consistently administer facilities use guidelines delineating permitted use. We could add a E, but then he's got to comply with legal anyways. So I don't know if we need to, it gets to be a pretty overdone. I don't know.
Where's that OE8? Which one?
It's
OE
OE
8.
Yeah, OE8,
7.
7.
It's already got 4 bullet points underneath it. We could throw a 5th one in, but I don't.
Right there.
Permitted
Yeah.
use.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah, that would be a good spot to put it, Ingrid.
My thing is, it's, then we've got to monitor it, and we've already got the legal, superintendent will comply with the law. I mean, so I don't know. Otherwise, you have to be like, well, it's up to you guys. I don't particularly care because I can't imagine. I have to hear why this is something that would take a lot of energy from the board. But we're adding we're adding a 5th bullet point.
And you know what, looking at number 6, I think that kind of catches it as well.
Yeah.
Love it.
And I mean, if there is a law that you can't have open caskets where food's prepared, which seems reasonable to me.
That makes sense.
Is there a law that says that?
Oh, no.
I think that's
To me, I
just,
thought it was more icky than.
I think that's just good practice. but I don't-
Yeah.
Back
I'm
and
just-
check regs too. Yeah.
Well, can I say something?
Yes, sir.
Yes. No, I'm sorry.
When funerals are held at schools, they're usually in the gym. They're not in the cafeteria.
Okay. Is Mr. Otting there?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have anything to add, sir?
What I was gonna add is you went, I was listening in on the YouTube channel, I guess, until I got in here. And I did hear how you discussed, what the AR is and how it addresses left to the superintendent. So there have been several interpretations over the years. Currently, the policy, and this has been in place for some time now, that we only allow memorial services. There cannot be a casket, and that it has to be for either a student or a teacher or staff member. That's pretty much the criteria for there be a memorial service. And so there has been some pushback over the years to expand that. And I believe that's where, if the board wanted to give some guidance to the superintendent on what he's to allow there, is something that could be positive. And it's not about a DHEC rule or anything of that nature. You know, the concern specifically when you start talking about a casket is having a casket in front of young children and them picturing that in their school environment, and that being something that's imprinted on them. We run into this, you know, at Ladies Island L, where there's a cemetery next door that we have to provide access to. We make sure that whenever that occurs, that the kids are inside or not exposed. And it's just to try not to, you know, put that on the kids, you know, traumatize them in any way, or have that placed on them if we don't have to.
Mr. Campbell's hands up.
Mr. Campbell?
Attended several funerals at schools, and everyone I've attended, there was kids were not involved. You know, in fact, we had one funeral held. In fact, one was held at Well Branch for a teacher, and some students were there. So there's not going to be any effect on children.
Money laundering.
I mean, you know, to me, there's already an AR, so we would just be having to direct the superintendent to review the AR and to bring it in compliance with the OE, right? And so the OE is basically, going back to it here.
I have it on the screen.
Yeah, I've got my own personal thing going down here, Robin. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm just gonna, because I'm on the AR here. So if we want to add something, I mean, I personally, I like the clear user expectations. Maybe we can put that in and say that it's not in compliance with clear user expectations, and make sure that people know that there shouldn't be caskets at funerals. I'm much more pro memorial service and not as keen on, I just, to me, it seems weird to have caskets there, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on.
When was this AR last reviewed by operations or brought forward to the full board?
Well, OS 29 Q.
Yeah.
Yeah, April 2020.
Okay. And has OE8 been reported out yet?
Well, that's our agenda later. Because it got sent back to policy.
Okay.
Williams, hands up.
Mr. Smith?
This is speaking to the OE in reference to usage of the building.
Yeah, we're discussing currently the use of facilities for funeral services.
Right. And in terms of that, I don't think that we should say that we shouldn't have caskets in buildings. I think that that's halfway insensitive and inappropriate. If you're having a service, basically you're telling them no. If you can't have the body, then what's the point of having a service in the actual building? So I think that's a bit far. And at the end of the day, these are taxpayers' buildings. You know, yes, we have these buildings, but at the end of the day, to say that someone can have a casket in there, that's no far. In fact, one of my elementary school teachers just recently died, and she was very respected very known in the community. So you mean to tell me that if her family came and said right now, you know, her funeral the crowd would be too big for the church that we have, then we would say, oh, you know, after she sacrificed and gave us all those years, that they couldn't have the funeral at the church, or they could have it, but her body couldn't be there. It's all or nothing, and it hadn't been a problem with the district this far. I don't see why this board has a problem with it. This has been something that's been going on since I remember as a kid. Was going to a funeral at the Old Beaver High School where a guy named Clint, he died. He died in a basketball game. His funeral was at the gymnasium, was at Old Beaver High School. This has been something that's been going on before our time. I don't see why we're trying to come in now and make restrictions. I just think that's a bit much.
Well, I'm going to provide a little bit more context of what I think, and please, committee members, correct me if I'm wrong, where I think we are right now on this is that there is an AR that references funeral services and does provide some information on that. They'll be considered on a individual basis. It's my understanding that the administration is looking for a little bit more guidance from the school board because our policy doesn't necessarily refer to funeral services explicitly. It does tell the superintendent in OE8, you know, what to, under OE87, is that it, Robin?
Mhm.
Yeah, to develop and consistently administer facilities use guidelines, and then have some additional subparts to that. So we were discussing whether or not we felt it was necessary to get that detailed in the policy, or if we could just leave it as is. And then we additionally were talking about where we were in terms of the board doing any review of compliance with OE8. So I don't know if necessarily it is board driven at this point. It's just that we're trying to figure out what we need to do, if anything.
Well, actually, a while back, I do remember where there was someone or something, or a funeral trying to happen or something, and there was a question about a casket being in the school. And
Oops, I lost
Mr.
audio.
Matthew, we've lost you.
Okay, I can't hear him. I don't know if anybody else.
No, can't hear him.
There are, so I'll just throw out there, I come from Washington State where there's probably, South Carolina, it looks like, quick glance, doesn't have a lot of laws. Apparently you can still bury someone at home in your backyard here in South Carolina, according to what I'm seeing. I don't know if that's still true, but so I may be coming at it from a different perspective, but I do think that having a casket, it's not required that they're embalmed. I don't know how long the time frame is. If a person died of contagious, there are a few things that should guide, but I don't think it's the school boards. It's more, there's a health sort of violation that we can't be completely open on funerals, just as a, steward of a public place, because there are some things that there are a few regulations.
Yeah.
One of the things just for consideration, this is new to me. In some parts of the country, bodies are actually viewed erect, standing up, in various, almost like it's almost like a mannequin. And so that is a social trend that's happening among the younger people.
Mhm.
And I think we may want to be maybe look at how do we maybe preclude that from happening, because I think that would be shocking as an adult seeing it online. It was pretty shocking to see. So for whatever that's worth, to get ahead of it in case it heads this way. Thank you.
You're not wrong on that, Mr. Dallas. I've seen that as well. This is just my opinion. I personally think that the OE as it sits allows the superintendent discretion to set what he thinks the parameters should be for the expectations and use of the facility in terms of funerals, but that's my personal opinion. I don't know if anybody else feels differently or strongly about adding any language to the policy.
Mr.
do-
Smith, hands up.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the room now. There was a situation a while back, and actually, I don't think that it should be up to the superintendent. It should be a policy, because what's good for one is good for all. And by putting it up to the superintendent discretion, then that's not clear. And we're gonna make policies and proceed. We're gonna make policies, and policies should be clear and straight driven. And we should basically be intentional about our policies and procedures. So I heard a little bit of what Mr. Dallas was saying. Those bodies, it's like he was saying that bodies might sit up or something like that. That is stuff that happened in the city when they embalm the bodies, and they don't embalm the bodies all the way. That is not something that is not a practice that happens here in the South. That is normally, unless a body has been shipped, but that does not happen here normally. In my days, in my 30-some odd years of living down here, going to a lot of funerals, and also doing stuff with that business. That's not my experience, and that's not my experience. However, I think that we're doing too much in terms of it. It should just be. Everyone, like I said, everyone don't have the finances. I remind people, these are public facilities, and I've never ever heard of a situation where having a funeral was a problem on a school campus. A party or something of that nature, yeah, maybe. A game or something of that nature, yeah, maybe. But a funeral where a family is mourning, I think that it should be. We're going to allow people to have funerals here with the body, and it should not be put on the superintendent. No, as the board, that's our job. If we're gonna lay this out, then we should lay it out to where families do have that right, because sometimes families can't afford. And I remember a couple of years ago where we actually had a funeral at St. Helens Elementary School, and the family had the body in the gymnasium. If the mother and the father don't want the kid to see the body, then they won't allow the kid to attend the funeral. Or when that happens, when the body's being shown, then they will take the kid out of there. But beyond that, I don't think that's our call to make. But if we're gonna do it, then we should do it fair. We should do it fair and sensitive and objective to everyone's need. But doing anything else from someone who's been in that business, who understands that business, who was raised up and brought up in that business, this is totally out of order. Thank you.
Mr. Otting, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When our facilities are used for a funeral service, is there a fee charged?
So no, because as of right now, the policy is, we're only doing it for teachers or students. So we consider it a school-sponsored event.
Got it. Okay. And who's in charge of cleanup?
So it would be custodial. So if there are any fees, it would be due to custodial costs, but I don't think we've had to deal with those if it's, but yes, if there were some extra custodial fees because of the size of the crowd or timing of it, then that would be the only charge. And that's $25 an hour.
So we don't charge for insurance or security or any of the other things that we do?
We do not charge for security because we consider it a school-sponsored event. And actually, now that I say that, we would not charge for custodial because that would be a school-sponsored event, and therefore custodial would not charge extra.
Yeah.
Are there any?
We've never had one large enough where we felt like security was an issue, but if we did require security, then we would charge that to the group as well.
What is the criteria to be a school event? Because all other private use is prohibited according to the AR, funerals on a case by case. what other sorts of events not related to the school district do we put under the umbrella of us? Because you're saying that basically we do it under school use because we're limiting it to school personnel or students, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's because that's not in the AR. if
No,
what-
that's kind of, that is that's the superintendent's interpretation, that's his rule right now. Is that we're only allowing, and that's the question for the most part, we only allow students and teachers, and it's only a memorial service. If the board wants it to expand that, then that's the guidance that we would be looking for, because as of right now, that's not what we allow according to the AR. With this superintendent, with this AR.
It almost sounds to me as if, is it really a problem? I thought it was more expansive than just teachers and students, that the general public could make that request. But if it's teachers and students, that may be tight enough to maybe avoid most of the concerns that have been expressed.
No, actually, the last firm that we had at St. Helens Elementary School, Clifton Chaplin, he was actually, we did pay for custodians, because I remember the principal didn't have him pay for the custodians, because I think he did the principal said that St. Helens, it was at least a 2-hour minimum, because he would have to but I believe it was for like 4 hours. And when the custodian did get paid, and he was not a member of the school. So and that's where some of this came from, because someone else wanted to have a funeral who was not a part of a general public. Because also, just to think about it too, if that's the case, in writing this policy, we also have churches who rent at Battery Creek High School, who rent from us, who have contracts with us, who have churches inside of our schools. So you mean to tell me that if one of their members died and they have churches in our schools or at Battery Creek, that we shouldn't allow them to have a full-fledged funeral in the building if the school is not open, if it's on a Saturday or something? I think that would be absolutely wrong, because if so you mean to tell me that we're good enough to get their money to rent out our facilities, but we can't allow them to have a funeral in the facilities.
Okay.
But so I mean that's just I mean, so that could be a slippery slope
Mr.
that we're
Campbell,
going.
Mr. Campbell, you have your hand raised. Oh, there we go.
Yes. My years on the school board, every time this policy comes up, it's always something that we seem to can't agree on. Let me say this. People pay taxes, and we talk about passing a referendum, we talk about other stuff. Folks are not going to agree every time. If they cannot use the school to have a funeral and pay for the cleanup, then, it's what you're saying to the community. And you don't need no security. I've attended several funerals at our schools, Battery Creek, Well Branch, and other schools. And there's never been a problem, So, I hope that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot behind this, because each time this comes up, it's a long, drawn-out discussion about funerals in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Yeah, and we've now spent about 30 minutes or a little bit less than 30 minutes on this topic, and we do have some other items to dispose of. So I would like to try to wrap it up if we could. Is there any inclination by the committee to amend or propose any changes to our current policy? Okay.
Not on my end.
Okay. Seeing none, I do want to just state, though, it's my understanding OE8 will be coming in its review capacity or looking at its compliance capacity to the full board. So there may be further discussion or a motion made at that time, but right now out of committee, it seems to be the committee's will that there's not going to be any modifications relative to funeral services in our board policies. Sound good?
Agree.
Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, item C, volunteers move to communications. The OE needs to be updated. Robin, can you provide a little bit more context for that one?
From my understanding from our meeting, the reason why this got on the agenda is when HR made their annual report back in the fall, it was indicated that volunteers have been moved to communication, not the vetting of them, but the rest of the managing of volunteers. So we needed to update the OEs to move it from under personnel administration to communication. Where it goes, I don't know, and Candace and Wendy might have more, but that's the only reason why this was brought up and put on the agenda, because it's a leftover from our November meeting.
And do we have, it's Dr. Bruder now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Bruder?
Yeah, so basically, so communications will be doing like managing the volunteers, although it still is, a somewhat decentralized program with schools, doing the boots on the ground kind of thing. But in terms of the initial application process, that kind of thing, communications will be managing that. However, HR will, and I talked with Ms. Walton before this meeting and Jennifer Staten, HR will still be doing the vetting. Basically how it works is we will have the Raptor software system in place for the upcoming school year. And when people apply, they can do their background checks. If something is flagged as not okay, then that gets bounced to HR, and then they will reach out to that person and deal with that particular issue. So communications will be managing, however, background checks will be in coordination and run through HR.
Okay.
And I was at this meeting. It was my understanding that you're going to be kind of keeping track of the volunteers, right, Dr. Bruder? Like who's signed up, who's been authorized, who's, that type of thing.
Yes, via that software. And we're still in our initial stages. My department's having some restructuring. And so we're in the initial stages of figuring out what that's going to look like, but yes.
So if I can make a recommendation, Madam Chair, because I was in this meeting, that we combine 1 and 2 into conducting background checks into, pretty much everybody who's going to have direct contact with students. And then we can add something about, who's actually in charge or overseeing the volunteers, because it's not HR, and put that into, you've got up here, I'm trying to remember which one we thought it went into. If you'll give me a second, I'll pull up my thing here.
So you're thinking it goes under the communications OE, where it goes under communications OE?
Well, I think that, but wasn't it like, I'm trying to remember. I can go back and look. I think it was like OE3, treatment of stakeholders or something like that.
Hold on, let me get here.
Because it became clear that HR didn't have that much to do with the volunteers.
Hold on.
I guess I'm a little bit unclear on the need for the change. I realize that on the back end of things with HR and communications, both having a hand in either the vetting or management of the volunteers, I'm not sure if our policies need to be changed, because our policies direct the superintendent. And so as long as we have in there that, we're doing background checks on the volunteers, and that the superintendent there's expectations over that for the superintendent, he can move the parts around on the back end as he sees fit. But I might be misunderstanding the need.
I recall we had a pretty good discussion about, if we're keeping up with who's coming in and out of the buildings, right? Like how we're training them and how we're assigning them. And really HR was not, the HR really was not doing that. That fell under Dr. Bruder's department, as I recall. This was back in November, I think, that we had this conversation. So, so that was sort of the thought that if we were going to want to keep up with, and, you know, in terms of expanding community engagement and knowing who's in the building and why they're there and what their skill sets are, you know, all those kinds of things, that HR wasn't really going to do that. The only thing that HR was going to do was background checks, but and Robin, I may be wrong, but there was nothing in place to make sure that all the volunteers had background checks or that they were up to date or something like that. So there was some concern.
No, that part was true. HR, the background checks and stuff, everything they do, they go through HR. So that part was fine. And part of the communication of what you were discussing was you were talking about volunteers and their different areas and how you're going to keep up. Where was the software that says Robin is good to volunteer and dance or something, but the different skill sets of volunteers of inside and out and how that was going to be placed. And HR said that is not what they do. And,
right.
And in trying to recruit volunteers and so forth, that they were just to cover the background, but they were not the ones who go out and get volunteers and, you know, keep up with them and manage them, so forth.
Who is?
I just,
Sorry.
Who had their hand raised?
Mr. Dallas, wasn't it?
Yeah. Who is in charge of monitoring and ensuring that the volunteers are in compliance?
That was one of the issues.
And if that's not clearly delineated, who does that? I'm wondering if with all the focus that it appears is coming on the efficacy of the communication process and into the community, do we need more resources if it's going to be in communication? Because if a volunteer is not properly vetted and something happens, then that could be a Donnybrook of negative information, negative perception in the community.
Yeah, it's my understanding that that the vetting part of it and the background checks and whatnot, that would be during the monitoring report of OE4 is what you would receive as a board. Okay, here's the superintendent's evidence of conducting those background inquiries and checks. Like here's, you know, whether it's he can
That's
do
1 and 2.
I found the section. Now it's coming back to me because this section was Trisha Fidrich.
Yes.
What had come up was it was in the conversation with the OE4, but one of the things that came up was, Candace, if you remember, a group at one of the middle schools or something were volunteering at car lines and they all wore matching shirts with their organization. And so there was some talk like, do we have policies around volunteers? Because we were concerned about people market or something like that. And it says, is that something we don't really have? I'm reading the transcript. I don't know if that's an HR. It's going to be really volunteers, rules and regulations for volunteering. It's not so cumbersome that no one wants to volunteer, you know, all that kind of stuff. So that's why I think we were saying that we should put volunteers into communications and just make HR responsible for the background check. That's I think how that conversation came about. And volunteer engagement and, you know, what you can wear, what you can't wear, how you can behave, how you can't behave. We don't really have a policy for that.
Then if I may, then it may require looking at the FTE allocations for communications so that can be properly managed. If volunteers, if it's sort of dispersed, and I understand that the individual school administrators are basically the boots on the ground, so to speak. Just raising that as an issue because I think communication is going to have a heavy lift in terms of expanding the message. And if they're going to have to do the monitoring of volunteers and the address that they have or the attire, that could be a heavy load if we don't properly or incrementally resource it. Thank you.
I was going to propose a modification to OE4 that might kind of put some arms around this and wrap it up. OE4 expectations for the superintendent include, and then if you look at number 5, administer clear personnel rules and procedures for employees. I would just add and volunteers to the end of that. And that would then put within the superintendent's discretion, the ability to create clear expectations for the volunteers. Is there any thoughts about that suggestion?
In this meeting, Alice Walton did say that HR did not deal with volunteers. So you may want to check with Alice Walton, because like to Mr. Dallas's point, if we are going to develop, and I don't know what our ARs are, I hadn't really looked at it, but I got the impression that it was HR was basically handing it to communications, right? Dr. Bruder, was that your understanding?
Spoke with Ms. Walton prior to this meeting today. She did say that. And like I said, my department's getting a bit restructured, so we're in conversations about that. But yes, they would just be doing the background check.
And I think that's still fine. I don't think that, so that the OE is going to guide the superintendent in what things need to be monitored and what things need to be done. And however you guys structure the back end of things, I think is completely within Frank's discretion as the superintendent to decide. But I don't think, we need a separate OE for volunteers or really to get too far into the weeds with that. It sounds like that the concern initially was about what volunteers were permitted to do. And as of right now, our policy only really references the volunteers in terms of that they need background checks. So if we added something that says the superintendent shall, and the expectations are, that there's clear rules and procedures for volunteers, we could even add it as its own number if we wanted to, but
For employees and volunteers, just seems like it will fit perfectly just right there.
that's my personal suggestion, to kind of give that authority from the board to the superintendent to delineate, what are the rules? What are volunteers allowed to do when they do come into our facilities? What is the expectation for the volunteers? And then, if he says they can wear t-shirts, they can wear t-shirts. If he says, no, they can't, no, they can't. I don't think we need to get into the weeds with it.
I would agree with that, actually.
Okay. Ms. Boatwright, is there anything that might be missing?
No, I just think that actually came more from Alice Walton than anything else. But again, I don't. It's not a big deal.
Someone's
I think there was another point to this in terms of there was some volunteers and something that happened as well is another reason why this came about to the board as well. In terms of also, I believe that a program was supposed to be put in place as well as in terms of volunteers coming in, because versus them having right now we give out volunteer badges. And I think the badges were supposed to be stopped giving out, and they were supposed to check in every time and do something like a background check. I remember that. I think that was a part of this conversation as well. But
they still get badges. Anybody coming into the school building still gets badges.
Right, but Ms. Cushionberry, they were talking about getting the actual paper badge versus the actual hand badge. It was something along that conversation, I believe.
Mr. Campbell's hands up.
Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, the volunteers, what they do, they go online, and then they do a background check, and then they send the badge to the school, and they can go there and pick it up. It's always been that way. There have never been no problem. Ever since they started this.
No, I agree with you, Mr. Campbell. But what I was saying was that I remember they were talking about.
Please.
Talking about what?
Go ahead, Mr. Campbell.
But there have never been a problem because of a background check. They do a background check, and they get a badge. They don't. The badge doesn't come from the school or the district.
He's coming down.
Okay. If you want to come on.
Right, Ms. Walton's coming down now. Just to let you guys know.
Thank you.
She's on the way. She's there. Yeah. But with just No, Mr. Campbell, I do agree with you, but I just remember that there was an incident of something where they were talking about changing the format of basically that every time someone come to become in the business, I mean, someone come to volunteer, that they would just do the background check versus the one time when they first issued out. It was something along that. Because I remember we had this conversation in operations committee. That's where this conversation initially took place in.
Madam Chair, I'm having a little challenge with my computer, so I can't actually show a hand, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going back to the earlier recommendation to add volunteers to line item 5
Yes, sir.
and defer to the superintendent. I think that may clear it up, and that would give it to the person who is on the ground, so to speak, and leading the charge. And I think that that allows him and empowers him or him now to actually come up with some guidelines. So I will be in support of that.
Okay. Should I pass the gavel and make that motion real quick?
Yes.
Pass it to Ms. Boatright real quick. So I move that we.
Hold on.
You
So
ready?
this is your motion? Let
Yes,
me get that. Okay, let me get. All right,
So the
motion to,
motion to add and volunteers to the end of OE4 sub 5.
okay. Motion to add volunteers to the end of OE sub 5.
OE4 sub 5, yes, ma'am.
Second.
Second,
Who made the motion?
I did, I passed the,
Okay, so you passed it, okay,
I'm passing it back. I seconded the motion.
okay.
Here you go.
any discussion on that, or should we wait for Miss Walton and let her?
Ms.
Yes.
Walton is with someone. She is on her way, but she's in her office still with someone, so.
Okay.
uh,
Well, if we want to go ahead and dispose of or pass it, and then we can always pull it back up, by prevailing party.
And Madam Chair, it appears from what little understanding I have that it won't affect what Ms. Walton is doing.
Correct.
Correct.
So maybe we can move forward and vote on it.
Yes, let's go ahead and call the vote on that then. Ms. Boatright,
Aye. Sorry.
Mr.
Aye.
Dowd,
Aye.
myself, aye.
Okay. All right,
And then we can always, when Miss Walton gets there, we can always
okay.
go back to that. Let's see, I heard someone.
Yeah, apparently she must have stopped by that.
All right. Shall we wait for Miss Robin?
I guess she,
I'll try to. I know that Miss Boatright, you might have some comments on item D, so we'll move down to that one and let you kind of take the wheel.
right.
Item D is how we receive executive session materials.
Yes.
Ma'am.
And I was very excited about, I haven't had a chance to look at the new board docs thing, but it is it's really frustrating to me on the executive session materials that we can't see them in any way in advance prepared, we can't read through them, and they're fairly lengthy multi-million-dollar contracts we're looking at. I also can't go back and they're not in board docs. So you can't go back and say, at this meeting, we had look it up. And I understand there is in 2023, there's amazing things we can do in terms of making sure that those documents don't get out to the public to the extent that it's possible, right? I mean, executive session, it's not a skiff, it's school board things, and we don't want things getting out to the public. And I think we can take reasonable precautions, but I think we have to balance it in terms of this stuff should be available to be at least reviewed prior. I mean, I'm usually looking at 30 minutes before a meeting starts. And so I personally think that we should find digitally secure document security and have them available in advance to look at, and things that are highly sensitive, like a disciplinary measure or something that would expose us to liability type of things we can do day of. But all these contracts and things, and we've got a whole nother referendum coming. It's crazy to me that I'm like, have this, 30-page contract. And usually, you're just looking through to make sure everything's there, but it doesn't make me feel good to try, if we have 2 or 3 of those, to try and get through those before we go into executive session. So I'd be interested in the feedback from those present.
Okay. Well, I agree with you. So there's that. I think
I make a motion.
yeah.
And
Mr. Dallas.
I too have been somewhat surprised at the short amount of time given to review some complex documents. So I would certainly favor extending the review period with the caveat that there are assurances that the security and protection of the documents remains intact.
I think so I know that the documents in the past have been available for review at the district office if we were able to come in prior to, right before the meeting or whatnot, but we haven't had, just for others who might be listening in on YouTube, we haven't had that ability electronically.
Yeah.
So that would be something new. So I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if there's been research done into that in the past.
I sent stuff. Well, there are so DocuShare, DocuSecure. I mean, there are whole platforms because people are closing multi-million-dollar deals across continents, So, I mean, you can go so far as to have every page watermarked so that if someone were trying to print it, it would print out who had printed it. You can have them locked, you can have them secured. And I understand that there's no way that we can be, sorry about the dog, quiet, that we can be 100% sure, but there's really no way, period. So, sorry, I'll get off until she calms down.
No, you're fine. And I think that we may need to consult with our legal counsel in terms of what is the expectation of us when it comes to executive session. I think what is the standard? I think it's just a reasonable attempts have been made to maintain the confidentiality. But I don't know what the legal standard is for executive session materials and information.
And I think Wendy and I talked about this before, didn't we, Ms. Cartledge?
You need to ensure the confidentiality because in the past, prior to this board, there was material that was, leaked to the paper that was confidential. So what you say, Ingrid, the DocuShare, and I know with some of my legal documents and some of my cases we've been able to transmit them securely.
Yeah, there's no question.
Yeah, we can't do anything with like Social Security, or, certain personnel documents, but with our legal cases, we're able to do it securely. So there's a way to do it.
It's what most people do. It's not the exception. We are the exception.
You need time to review those long documents, those long contracts.
Absolutely.
That takes a long time. You need to be still.
Do you have a motion that you'd like to come out of committee?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I didn't know if it would be a motion or a recommendation out of committee, but I would be happy to make a motion that the board move to a secure digital format, if that's the right way to put it, a secure digital format for executive session documents.
Okay, so yeah, it would be a recommendation. You're correct. It would be that the policy committee, if this is voted up.
I have a motion to recommend to the full board to secure a digital format.
Yeah, I wasn't really prepared to make a motion because like I said, I think it's just a recommendation coming out of committee. So I didn't have good words there.
I have a question.
Can I get the motion first? Motion to recommend to the full board to secure a digital format for executive session documents.
To adopt a secure digital format for the distribution of executive session documents.
To adopt a
secure digital format
Digital format
for the distribution
for the distribution
of executive
of
session
executive
documents.
session documents. All right, is there a second?
When's the appropriate time for me to just ask a clarifying question for me?
I'll go ahead and second it and open it up for discussion.
Okay. So does that address the length of time that we have to review?
That is in policy. I would have to pull it up. I believe that's in a policy of what the time frame is, correct, Robin?
For executive session? We
Yeah.
don't have I don't think we have a time frame for it.
I thought we used to have
Yep,
something.
yep,
I think we're supposed to have the documents like Thursday night before the meeting or something like that.
That's not executive session documents. Those are just your regular board document. We didn't specify for executive session, hence why you all can get them 24 hours of the day. So, so if you want to add that to it, but that doesn't include executive session because you don't get executive sessions until the meeting.
Yeah, I know. I think I'll try and find it because I think the term is vague and we've created an exception to it.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull up.
Can I pull it up? Let's
Oh, you
see.
got it?
Under coherent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's policy GC2, section 22, board meeting notification. All board members and staff members are to provide all materials to the board's executive assistant no later than 5 p.m. on the Thursday, immediately preceding the next regular board meeting.
Yeah, executive session is 20.
Executive session is 20.
Okay, I just thought that was the Thursday time thing that we have.
So,
But
I mean,
that's talk about the materials.
can you go to 20? You said it was 22, Ingrid?
Yeah, 22 is board meeting notification, and that addresses the
Time
material.
period.
Right there.
And I would concur that I don't think executive session materials need to be there over the weekend. You know, that's a long time for them to sit there, but I think it needs to be there. We should at least talk about the time frame.
My hand's up.
Mr. Smith?
Mr. Smith, she called you.
Yeah, I'm aware. Thank you, Ms. Cushenberry. In terms of the timing and going over these documents, just listening to what Ms. Ingrid said just now about the documents might not be there over the weekend, then what's the point of even having this? Because the matter of fact is that if I just have Monday morning or Monday before, Tuesday before the board meeting or something like that, if I'm out of town, I'm traveling that whole time, then I may have time over that weekend to actually look at that document. Coming back into town, I have time to look at that document. So that defeats the purpose of even having a program. So to do this. So what we really have to ask ourselves is, I think that we're diving into this is too much. Either we're going to have the program as board members to look over these documents, or even we're not. At the end of the day, we have a duty to read and make sure that we understand these documents as we make these decisions, or we vote on these documents. So whether it's from that Friday or that Thursday, once Mr. Cushenberry sends the email and say, attention to all board members, all the information is in board docs. Board docs is ready to go. From that point in time, to look at it from that folder until I see no problem with it, because if you ask me, if you want to be technical about it, the staff have this information beyond way more than that time. They're digesting it and they're going over it. So is it fair for us to look at it maybe one day or a day, a couple of hours before to look at it and digest it? So sometimes, but you might want to sleep on it. So I think if we're to say that, oh, we may just want it, a day before. And if I didn't understand that right, then I do apologize. But if we're asking for documents so that we can have the proper time, then once everything is put in board docs, then all that stuff should be added in there, and we should be able to have access to that because we're board members, we're not children. And then we are dealing with public funds, and we're dealing with people's lives here in terms of how we make these decisions. So that's just that's my that's how I feel about it. And when I say we're not children, as in, a kid, you tell a kid, okay, well, you need to do that and sit there, or you need to, versus an adult, hey, you give them a task and they get it done, and when they come to the table and they're ready to make a decision. Thank you.
Mr. Campbell?
As far as executive session, you cannot put executive session material in board docs.
I think that what Ms. Boatwright's recommendation is to, and Robin might have the motion, it's to use a secure platform to distribute it. So I don't know if board docs was what she was intending, but there are other digital online platforms that can provide those items to us securely, like either password protected or encrypted. So I don't think she was intending board docs, but please correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Boatwright.
No, it wasn't. But I will say, from what I understand of the new Diligent community demo that we received, that they have a secure module for just this purpose. And it is my understanding that the majority of school districts will put their executive sessions into some sort of secured document, especially because our district, for, if it's on Hilton Head, people in, coming from St. Helena or Whale Branch, it's a long drive. You have to leave quite a bit early. And a lot of us on the 278 corridor, works hard to get there early. And it's incredibly important stuff. So at a bare minimum, to me, it's more, I like to read it. I like to at least have looked at it. But I think, I want people to know I looked at it. So, but like I said, I'm up for discussion on it. I just think that it's 2023 and we can get this all done digitally. We can Zoom school, we can, all these things.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I wonder if including a stipulation of 24 hours before the meeting might be sufficient.
I'd be fine with that.
I was just going to provide a little bit of feedback in regard to the policy. The way I read it is that all supporting materials are supposed to be, including those for executive session, are supposed to be on Thursday, although it is not specifically indicated under that number or subpart. It does say all for
Thank
that
you.
meeting, and executive session is a part of that meeting and that agenda. So my interpretation of the policy is that executive session documents are supposed to be provided by that Thursday before. And the 24-hour thing was for special called or rescheduled kind of meetings.
One thing I do have, and for Mr. Auding, is I don't want to make it where if he doesn't have it in by Thursday, he can't bring a contract, forward, because they're, you know what I mean? Like if he was waiting on it, but he doesn't have it by Thursday, but he'd have it by Monday. So that's one reason I think you could have like a 24-hour rule for executive session, is to sometimes, I know we're coming down to the wire on some of those contracts.
Yeah.
And you have some executive session items that we don't get added until that Monday. Sometimes when we add things for executive sessions, they don't come out until Monday prior to us publishing the agenda. So you would not have it Thursday or Friday based off of what might happen over the weekend and so forth. And
here's what I provide too. If someone is unsatisfied with the amount of time that they have had to review an item that is going to be on the agenda, and they don't feel that the 24 hours or whatever is sufficient, they are certainly within their authority to request it be removed from the agenda, because we approved the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. So,
Right.
I mean, we went back and forth in regard to that whole timing thing a I've been on every policy committee that there has been since I was elected, and we've gone back and forth on that whole timing thing. And I know it's just, there's going to be instances where things don't come up or are a last minute emergency and they get put on before the 24-hour public notice. So I think getting into the timing part of things could be precarious.
Well, I would just say I concur with you, Dr. Wadesky, definitely on the part when you said that executive sessions documents are a part of the Thursday information when it's given. So at that point in time, those documents should be made available as readily as the other documents that are going out. I do concur with you on that. And in terms of what you just said, as I do at one point in time, the board members were talking that at some point in time, maybe we need to discuss, should there be a cutoff point? Because it becomes unfair to board members at the same time too, that if we're being given these huge documents or these bunch of documents at the last minute, like you say, we do have the authority to vote and take those documents off, but we also have the authority to tell if that document is that important to have a special call meeting to go over that document or to make that happen. So I just want to put both of those things out there as well in terms of what you just said. But like I said, I do concur with what you just said in terms of those executive session documents being ready on that Thursday, because we do policies for a reason.
And perhaps we need to have a full board discussion about changing that. See, maybe query the other board members and see if they feel like they're receiving sufficient notice on or time to review any of those documents, and see if we need to amend the policy. If it's the board's will that we amend the policy and we go to back to the drawing board, then certainly. I just I don't know if that's necessarily what was the task here.
Mr. Campbell's hands up.
Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, maybe what we should do is have executive session at the last part of the meeting. That will give board members enough time to read the documents. I mean, listen, I'm gonna say something. I know somebody gonna disagree. You elected as to get on the board. You know what your responsibilities are. Before you even got elected, you should know it. And if you want Ms. Cushenberry and Marley to have the document for you to get, then you come down to the district and pick it up, or you can they can deliver it to one of the schools on Hilton Head or Bluffton. But I get tired of hearing about I don't have enough time to do something. I understand everybody. Sure, you have a job, but you know that before you get on the board, and that's one of your responsibilities to be well informed.
I'm sorry.
I was going to just make a suggestion that we go ahead and vote this up or down in regard to the electronic secure digital format for distribution of executive session documents. And then I was going to just make a suggestion that I add into my report that we would like to query the board on how they feel we should proceed like we can put it on as a future agenda topic to review the time period and the length of time, just to get some feedback from the rest of the board on that.
Can I make one response though? Because to your point, Dr. Wisniewski, the policy, we are in violation of the policy at the moment, because as we have pointed out, all materials are supposed to be there on Thursday. And it is my understanding that the reason that we have done it the way we've done it, and anyone who's been on the board before me is free to correct me, the reason that we do it the way we do it is because we have concerns that even though the board members know their responsibilities and are supposed to keep information confidential, that there have been occasions where school board members have been derelict in that responsibility. So if the point is that when you are elected to the school board, you are supposed to know what your duties are, why are we doing the executive session this way? It's not a question of, I do resent the idea that I'm trying to make things quick and sweet. We should be efficient, because I want to be efficient. So I have, jobs and families. I knew what I was getting into when I ran for the board, but we should also be efficient because that's what the community wants us to be. The community does not enjoy 6-hour board meetings. The community does not enjoy the fact that we are approving multi-million-dollar contracts that we received 30 minutes prior to voting. So I think we need to think about it. It's fine by me. I have made the commitment and I have shown up for pretty much every single meeting and sat through 6-hour, 10-hour board meetings. But I think we need to recognize that we could do things a little bit better for our constituents who elected us. So that's all I'm going to say on that.
Yeah, I'll call the vote on this one, and then I think Miss Walton's been waiting patiently.
Mhm.
Miss Boatright, your vote?
Aye.
Mr. Dallas?
Aye.
I'm also aye, so that passes unanimously, and that will be in the recommendations that come out of policy. Miss Walton, thank you for waiting so patiently as we volleyed that back and forth. I'm gonna go back to that item. It was in regard to volunteers, and I don't know if you were in the room when we passed the change, but there was a addition that's going to be made or is going to be recommended out of policy committee to add on the language and volunteers to subpart 5 here. So the superintendent, it will be the superintendent's responsibility to, I don't know what the expectation includes, administer clear personnel rules and procedures for employees and volunteers. And I don't know if there was anything additional that anyone else wanted to add to that, but I was trying to catch her up to speed on that.
Okay, so your question is to add volunteers at the end of that sentence to infer that we are going to administer personnel rules to volunteers as well?
No, and maybe it needs to go somewhere else. We were trying to add in language that would provide for clear rules and procedures for volunteers. Something, and I believe someone brought up the example of that there had been some volunteers that were wearing t-shirts that perhaps others didn't think they should be wearing. But there was no clear rule about that for the volunteers. So the intention of the motion or this change was to allow for the superintendent discretion and the ability to create those rules and procedures for the volunteers, because right now it's not explicit in the OEs.
Could we have Mrs. Walton to also part of bringing her up to date is to have us to tell us also why this OE is moved to Mrs. Bruder versus HR. I remember you stated that one time before. I also do remember too where there was something, and it might not. I may have excuse me if I misinterpreted it wrong, but there was something too where I remember where a couple of board members were talking about background checks, and we were talking about that we were also getting a program. I believe this department was going to oversee in terms of and background checks and say versus giving people the badges. We were going to actually people were going to get background checks every time they come in the building. They would just get the sticker and they would go.
Raptor, we had mentioned Raptor.
That was Raptor.
Right. So, but basically, how come this OE and what this was where this conversation designed came that's appeared today? Where did that conversation come from? But in terms of Raptor, does Raptor have anything to do with this OE?
Okay, so in terms of volunteers and the split between HR and the community communications department, HR will only cover bringing in, doing background checks, run them through the background check system to make sure they meet standards in order to enter the building. We will do that. Volunteers typically fall in any communications department because it's a community initiative. That department will go out and recruit volunteers. It will help with volunteers in the building. We have it set up now so each school has a volunteer coordinator. And communications now will take up that piece to make sure that is functioning correctly at each building. HR wouldn't do that piece. We will keep background checks because we feel that since it's coming in on one system, it should be one manager of that system so that we can make sure those rules overlay everybody. But in terms of day-to-day working with volunteers, communication with the schools and the community with volunteers should be a part of communications. So that's why we moved it. Background checks stay with HR. As we do background checks for vendors, we will do background checks for volunteers as well as employees, because we have someone to manage that system. Our approval process is in place, so it should be standard across the board for anyone we approve to be in the building. So that's why we're keeping just the background check piece. And Dr. Wisniewski, if I could go back to your number 5 addition.
Yes, ma'am.
If we did that, if we added volunteers to that personnel rules, that means we would have to have a list of rules and expectations for all volunteers that enter the building. And we would have to have some kind of enforcement in place to make sure those volunteers are following that. That becomes difficult. We leave it at the school level because each building knows how they expect their volunteers to come in. They have set standards for their volunteers. And if we go out and overlay a dress code for them, a standard of operation for them, then we're really taking that back out of the school's hands. So I just think that's something to consider if you're thinking about overlaying rules. Since they are not our employees, we can't force them to do anything. They can easily say, I'm not following these rules, I'm not a volunteer.
Right. Understood. And I think I think it's fully within HR and the superintendent's discretion of how deep they get into those rules and procedures. I think just adding the words "and volunteer," my intent was just to say that the board expects there to be some type of framework for what is the expectation of a general volunteer in the school district. If the schools want to get more detailed than that, they could. If you guys want to just keep it very vanilla, you can, but it's just simply saying that the board believes there should be some type of framework for that. But if any other committee members think that that's off base, please let me know.
Well, if I can say this, it might be a better place in the volunteer handbook. These are the expectations for volunteers.
Right.
Once you are approved as a volunteer and you enter the buildings, these are things we expect that you're going to do. So it's laid out for them. They understand that before they admit to be a volunteer, commit to be a volunteer. And then we would deal with it that way.
And
versus it being a policy from the district.
Yeah, I think that you're correct. And that's kind of what I was expecting as being what would be done. I think I am not an HR professional, so the use of the word personnel may not have stood out to me, and it stands out to you more so in that you're thinking of this in terms of what is expected of your personnel. So I'm certainly open to changing that, but my intention was simply just that there was going to be some type of framework around what was the expectation for volunteers. We don't. Ms. Boatright?
Yeah, I did look, we have a fairly extensive AR on volunteers, including behavior, grooming, and dress. It says that, so there is an AR, it's just under community relations. And I think that was part of the thought too, is that any policies regarding volunteers should be under the dictates, the directive of Dr. Candace Bruder, as opposed to HR. Sorry, there's a lot of comings and goings this time of night. So that's why, but we do have that as an AR.
Okay, so then this would, I think getting into the department level is not necessarily where the OEs go, though. The OEs guide the superintendent, and the superintendent then decides where he wants it to go. So I don't know if we have to necessarily focus so much on it being in a certain OE number, but more so on it making sense where it's placed.
Yeah, and I think we've discussed it an awful lot. So
yeah, but so as long as the intention of the motion and the change is clear to staff and to the superintendent, then, or if anybody has any objection to keeping that original motion where it was, y'all,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I'm in favor with the clarifying the conversation that's just concluded, which to me means that by default, the superintendent can assign the personnel issues to HR and the volunteer handbook to communication. So I think it doesn't constrain his liberty as a leader and doesn't infringe on what it appears to me as understanding that HR would do HR matters and communications would do the rest of it. So I'm fine with the original motion.
Okay. And if we need to clarify that at the full board meeting when we make the recommendation out so that there's no confusion there, happy to do so. But the intention is not to take away from or add anything to the wrong department. That's at the superintendent's discretion. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So next item E, policy for points of celebration. I think the subparts that are under there. So there's my understanding, Robin, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the practice for our points of celebration has been that we first place items on the points of celebration that were for state recognition or above. The performances are to be limited to a maximum of 5 minutes, and that recognitions are not to be anything that is older than 3 months. And it's also my understanding that we don't have a specific policy for points of celebration. However, it could be included in the handbook. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But it's not presently in the handbook.
No.
Okay.
So we can take this recommendation and put all of that and put it in the handbook and make it a part of our.
Okay. Trying to pull up the handbook.
Let me go down chat. Let's see.
What's the difference between putting in the handbook and putting, I mean, obviously but what does the handbook do? It's not in any way enforceable. It's not, it's not really.
So the policy right now, that Robin has pulled up, that's an actual policy that sets what the normal content of the agenda would be.
Right.
But breaking out what is included in those different areas is not done here. It's not, there's no subparts like, okay, in student performances, we're only going to sing, or we're only going to hear from singers or dancers or anything. We don't get that explicit.
Right.
I think people are wondering what should be included in points of celebration. What are the general guidelines for when our agenda is set?
Right.
I don't think it necessarily needs to get too explicit down into the policies. If we put it into the handbook, then it's more of a guideline.
Which always that.
And you don't have to vote on if anything, if it's in a policy, then you have to vote, it takes the 3 votes. In the handbook, there are things that we put in there as guidelines that change on a frequent basis. And so those are the things that we put into the handbook, i.e. At the last meeting, it was suggested that we put the new board orientation materials. That's something that changes. So that would not be a policy, but that would be a guideline of these are materials that we need to cover in the new board orientation materials.
Right.
Which always that, if you don't mind me.
It's not an OE, it's in the handbook.
Oh, this is the handbook?
No, I mean, I don't have the handbook up. I'm online. Let me go.
This GC2 governing commitments, and it's 11D is just showing the order, the content typically that's on an agenda, but it doesn't get into subparts, additional subparts. So my suggestion would just to be take the common practice of those 3 items that are subparts that are listed in our agenda today and detail that in the handbook. However, I would need to see the handbook and I can't get it pulled up online right now.
Because the handbook is not online. I don't. I'm looking at it. The handbook is not online.
Okay. So I would need a copy. I would need a copy of the handbook to see where that needs to be exactly added, or we can simply say that we're going to place it at the next meeting if everybody
We'll
wants.
place it at the next meeting, and then you can see how other things are lined out in the handbook.
Okay. Is everybody good with that? So we can move along?
Yes.
Okay. Let's move along to the next item on the agenda. And that is discussion of OE8 facilities. And I believe this was also a Ms. Boatright item, and it was for adding some language.
It
you were-
was Dr. Colonel Geyer.
Oh, Colonel Geyer. Okay.
Yes,
Apologies.
you and I discussed that some of you had mentioned the requests for proposals weren't all listed, and that where there was some concerns that if this is our monitoring, this is how we govern, that we need more than some of what was provided. My example was some of the enrollment data that basically it was just, here's the CIP. So then Dr. Geyer wanted to come back to policy, and then it's going to go back to operations and then come back to the full board. So, but I did look at this, and I have a book. There's 2 coherent governance books, and I got the other one, which is the Art of Implementing Coherent Governance or whatever. And one thing that I know I've had conversations with a lot of board members is sort of monitoring indicators, right? What data are we going to use? And that's something that I think I can't remember because I had just come on the board and we were doing all the interpretations, but we really are supposed to have not only the interpretation of the language, but also what monitoring indicators are we going to use? So for an RFP, that section, you would want to see a report, an official data report that someone could pull, I would imagine, out of one of our systems of what RFPs came through, and type of thing, and maybe what date they were brought to the board or how they were disposed of. For me, with enrollment, I would like to see, there should be some discussion, we have capacity triggers. We have a referendum coming up. We have, a lot of enrollment issues, and there should be some sort of, here's the district's plan based on this data. So I think that was the point I was trying to make, was that we need more monitoring indicators for some of these things. Because this is really our governance model. And then it came here.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that I've had in the past is the formatting of how the monitoring reports are made. In my mind, when I'm going through each item, it's either got a report attached underneath the subpart 3 or 4, or it says NA, not applicable. Perhaps, maybe there was no school mascots or colors that were done during that period, so it's NA. But I had an issue with formatting in the past, and then I've also felt sometimes when we did receive the monitoring reports that it didn't necessarily hit on everything, and I didn't think we were necessarily in compliance because of, like you mentioned, I think it was the RFPs, or I think it was the RFPs one.
And for me personally, I think we've gotten a little bit, I don't know, but that whole thing we had at the end of last year where they came back out and we decided that we were going to do all the OEs at one time and not the subset, we've kind of gotten into where we do sort of anecdotal presentations, right? So now I will say, Alice Walton and her team came and did OE4, and in my opinion, we did the whole OE in 2 hours. And there was data on every subsection. There was a presentation. There was a talk about, I thought that was a good model for what I would think. And I think it'd be hard to do OE8 in one swoop, sit down and go through everything. But, and I'm not picking on OE8 because I think facilities overall does a lot more than the average department in terms of providing information with construction. I'm just saying in general, I was kind of using it as an example that, there should be data attached. There should be some sort of report run that we look at, and there should be some analysis of that data that comes out, and not just sort of a general,
narrative,
anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, it's in some cases, and that's a result of, each individual department taking ownership of that reporting out for the OE. So I do think that maybe some standardization is needed, and it makes sense that Ms. Walton and that we're very much in line with the subparts and being OCD about things, because she was my teacher when I was a kid. So makes sense. Yes.
I certainly support the idea that where we can have KPIs, key performance indicators, that really tell us the health of the business, the efficiency of the operation, not the business, the district, the efficiency of the district, those types of things. And the narrative takes so long. When it's being presented, because if we have the KPIs that are most relevant and high impact, we very quickly can say this is an issue that is not improved in 2 review sessions, and so what's going on? We can drill down very quickly, and I think the district will be more nimble in addressing issues. So I certainly support the idea of being more data driven.
The other thing too is, if you have these reports, one thing and this is an aside, but it does tie in because we monitor these OEs more or less through PowerPoints, right? And I have been from the get-go, I'm not a fan of PowerPoints, because a lot of times you see the PowerPoint, but I don't know what they have, like a sentence on there. I don't know what they're referring to until I get the presentation, where if I have the data in advance and I can look at it and, I can generate questions, I can ask those questions in advance if I need clarification. To me, it seems like that is the model that more school boards are on. And I think coherent governance we're trying to be faithful adherents, but we're not quite there. And so it's actually adding some weeds and adding time and whatnot, because really my ultimate goal is to have, like Mr. Dallas said, data quickly, understand, have a quick look and understand what's going on in that particular area of the school. So this was just an example, because I just felt like when I looked at OE8, we were going to approve the whole thing. And I just felt like we didn't have some of the conversations I was expecting we were going to have, and didn't see some data that I was expecting we were going to see at some point.
Yeah, I think when you have coherent governance, the expectation is, that it's the overarching policies are given. But then when the reporting and the monitoring part comes up, that's when you get the raw data. And that's when you get into the weeds, if you will, of are we meeting the overall expectation? And that's where the interpretations are also important. I'd like to see if Mr. Otting had anything to add, or anything that he thinks, we should consider in any recommendations or whatnot that we bring forward.
I've been just listening to your conversation. I'd say I don't have a lot of comments. I did think part of the item was that Colonel Geyer wanted to add the word secure, I believe. So that was one of the items. And then Ms. Boatwright, you mentioned data that you were surprised that you did not see. I'd love to have that conversation and learn what kind of data you would like to see going forward.
Oh, I'd be happy to have that conversation, Mr. Otting. But the other thing too is, and this is one particularly, I know we copied a lot of stuff right from Horry County, right? It's Horry County, okay. Because some of the stuff when I'm going through, it just doesn't match up with what I think we actually are doing in the district. Like, I don't understand that some of the number 2 there, it's just indefinite delay. I mean, it doesn't really even apply to us, right, Mr. Otting?
Yes, I'd agree with you completely. I do not understand number 2 either.
Yeah, and so that's my thing. It's like, if this is, and I know that, and I don't want to, because I've been on the board now 3 years, and I know that you guys put a lot of time into developing those coherent governance policies, but sometimes I feel like less is more with some of these policies. But if we're going to go less is more, that when they do come up, that we get good data. And I can give you, all kinds of examples. And now we have, but we now have the facilities assessment. So project lifecycle costs as capital decisions are made, project lifecycle, that you should be able to pull data right out of the FA for that.
Just in terms to the conversation that Mr. Otting have, I think more so it's a good thing to see what you would want to see more of, but I think it would be up to more to Mr. Otting to wanting to add what needs to be this is something that I believe that if Dave Scrivener was here, he would say it would be more of what the necessary things would that he would see fit that would in terms of reporting that would need to be reported. I think that sometimes that there's a catch-all that tells you everything that you would need to be versus going and picking line by line what you want to see. I think the report should encompass everything versus what we want to see. I think it's up to the staff to basically give full reports into everything that needs to be reported. I guess that's the best I could dress that up. Basically saying something that I believe that would be that would definitely be one of David Scrivener's response to the conversation you just had, the conversation that just took in place.
Well, I'm in the position of reporting to a board as well, and I pull a lot of data. And they'll say, they'll ask me a question, and my first response is, "What do you want to see? I can show you this. So I think it's reasonable to have a two-way conversation, so that we're not, the staff's not guessing. But let me give, as I'm looking at over Rachel's head on the screen, develop and consistently administer facility use guidelines delineating. Well, we have that AR, so we talk about that AR, but then there's a list of permitted uses. We should have a report on, what were the permitted uses this year? And just like we do with FOIA, just stuff like that, because otherwise I think what we have done for that section, this is, and Mr. Otting, please understand that this is just an example. It is in no way a reflection on the operations department. But this is a complicated one. But the one where we do permitted uses, I don't think we should have a report at that time on what the permitted uses have been authorized so far that year. Because otherwise what we're doing is just, showing the AR, but we don't know how, again, with the funerals, I had no idea that we were having a lot of funerals at schools. I would like to know how many funerals we hold per year at school, at what schools, just that kind of thing. I mean, and that gives the board some insight into how the policies and the ARs are actually being implemented and affecting the running of the district.
I'm gonna jump in here, just two things real quick. In terms of number 2, where we're not sure what that means, a couple things. Number 1, I think I see a formatting error. B, item subpart B says design, bid, build, and it also references construction manager at risk. I think that was supposed to be its own subpart, construction manager at risk, just so you know.
Okay.
And then I believe that what this is, or the intent of this is it's giving what is the expectation for whether or not board approval or recommendations are necessary for those different types of awards. So like for design, bid, build, it says that that it would provide recommendations for board approval of, and it lists off the different contracts, I believe, for that. And then construction. So it's providing basically what is the expectation. If we're going to use this delivery method, then what is the expectation for the board from the administration, is my understanding of that area. And the suggestion that I would make additionally, since a lot of this has to do with structure of reporting, when those monitoring reports come out, is because a lot of this came from ORI, perhaps we should reach out, or maybe the administration should reach out to ORI and say, or their facilities department, and say, how are you reporting this out to your board? Is it coming forward as a narrative? Is it coming as a slideshow? Is it coming forward as, how are you reporting it? What standard are you using? What kind of reporting are you doing? They might be doing way less than what we are expecting, but at least we wouldn't have to recreate the wheel if they had something that was usable. Yes, Mr. Otting?
So, on number 2, yes, I agree. You're setting some rules on when you bring things to the board, but the board has, since this has been written, pretty much set the guideline that we go by, which is the cost factor. How much is the item worth? It's 1% of the overall budget of the district, which right now somewhere around 600,000, which falls in line with one of all these. I mean, I think this, I didn't know we were gonna do this today, but I think item 2 could be simplified. And it's, like indefinite delivery are items that are less than 200,000. Of course, but the same thing, since the monetary means we don't bring it, you say on there, we don't need to bring indefinite delivery contracts to the board. That's kind of covered under both items. So I think that could just be, if we wanted to, we could simplify number 2 and make it, unless you do want something other than the monetary factor being when we bring contracts to the board. I think it's worked out well where we are, but
Well, it keeps the board above the fray when it comes to the selection process, correct?
yes. And it makes sure that we bring all the larger contracts to you.
Yes, but what are you doing to develop methods to reduce energy consumption?
Well, that's not in item 2.
That's another, I'm just saying.
That's in a later item. If you'll notice, that's item 9. So yes, that is something we should bring as a report to the board, although it's not currently on your board calendar for us to bring that report outside of when we bring the entire OE to the board.
Yeah. I'm just saying some of these OEs, I think it's difficult to come up with monitoring indicators, but I think we've gotten into, and I say this across all departments. We aren't being as strictly adherent to the idea of what we do. We monitor, like I said, and like Mr. Dallas said, data, deep dive, drill down.
I mean, sorry, I was just gonna say, like, and I don't recall, and we don't have a copy of it here, of what the prior reporting looked like. But did you, on any of the reporting, did you provide, like, it would be found on this page of the facilities book that you received, or did you provide a copy of that page? How was that reported out?
I believe, Robin, weren't you bringing up the report from last year just a second ago? The OE, or did you have the OE report for OE8?
This is the,
That's
So
the
that's, no, our report that we gave. So yes, no, what we did was go through each item and say where it had been addressed.
yes, I can bring that
so-
up if you want. Go.
And energy is one that's kind of interesting just because it's an easy one to give data on. But in the COVID world, when we were under COVID for the last few years, energy consumption kind of went out the window, to say, compared to air quality. So we focused on air quality instead of energy consumption. But now, hopefully in the future, we can get back to not being as worried about, and when I say worried about air quality, we were doing things that were not very efficient, like running buildings 2 or 3 hours ahead of schedule before they were open, just to make sure air circulation was in there.
Well,
Or maybe we need to discuss more.
Yeah, it just seems like an ORI specific OE. But one thing, I was pulled up OE 8.6 from April of 2022, and it does have the interpretation and monitoring indicators. And the monitoring is, so OE 8.6, ensure that facilities are clean, sanitary, and safe. So it interprets the thing, and then here's the monitor. We will know we are in compliance when we can show a functioning work order system. Well, okay. Positive principal survey results from the schools participating. That I think was good because we see those survey results. But I mean, it's more, I want to know what are the closeout status of work orders, right? I don't want to know that we have a functioning work order system. I want to see the reports. And we did have a really nice report from Ms. Majors. And it says positive contract scope of services review. Survey that includes the teacher's voice through the teachers groups. And we're not doing that yet, are we?
No, yes, when we surveyed for maintenance custodial, we make sure that we send that same survey to the teacher groups, teacher forum groups. So yes, we do make sure that we survey teacher groups to get a teacher's voice as part of that.
Okay, I thought we were just doing principals and that there was some debate about that. And then
No, we did not. No, we did both.
okay. So anyways, that's the monitoring indicators for that.
I think ultimately what it comes down to for me is wanting it to be clean and standardized across the entire system or across the entire district. I realize that's difficult to do when you have different departments reporting out their own data. So I understand that's a large ask. And then number two, if we don't feel like we are receiving, the data that we want to see, that we ask for that, or we give that feedback to the department and to the superintendent, and the board as a whole does like what we did. We pressed pause on that monitoring report and said, okay, we want more, or we want this clarified before we're going to say we're good with this. So I think we're doing what coherent governance calls for. I know for me, I felt like we were not necessarily, or hadn't been necessarily in compliance. Like Ingrid mentioned on that, I think it was the RFP subsection of 8. So that was my kind of hang up. I don't know if anybody else wanted to request additional documents or request additional reporting that's specific, but those are my comments.
Did you also want to look at what Colonel Geyer, this is what Colonel Geyer wanted to add. He wanted to add the word secure up here.
Safe, secure, and properly maintained.
Properly maintained, yeah. So that was the recommendation, to add safe and secure, safe, secure, and properly maintained to this line.
In terms of process, that came out of
Operations.
And did that go to the full? I apologize.
It went to the full board, and the full board asked it to come to the policy committee to make the adjustment, because it came out of the report that he made at a committee. It came out of committee report to the full board, and it was assigned for it to go back to policy.
Got it. Okay, so then I'll.
So
anybody
it,
want to go ahead
it should
and-
be added here. It is the recommendation.
Okay. I don't know if we necessarily need to make a motion on that, because it's already come to us for.
Just to do it. Yeah, to codify it.
It will need to go back to the full board for a final reading though.
Okay.
So I'll put that would be in my OE8 secure.
So does it go to this board meeting since we've met as a final reading, or does it go on the next board, full board, which would be the second meeting in May?
The next full board meeting. It would go final.
Not next Tuesday or the following? Our next full board meeting is next Tuesday.
I'm fine with whichever, if the agenda's already, full up.
Well, this would come out of, this would be on, well, I guess what I'm asking is because policy is a meeting, so out of your committee report, so we would put this on as a final reading under board business coming out of committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
This was supposed to go back to operations.
It doesn't go, let's see, oh.
So it was a committee recommendation from operations to the full board. The full board supported it being, so that was essentially a first reading of the change to the policy, was brought down, then was directed to policy committee for insertion, and then policy committee will bring it out for its final reading. So it kind of,
So then this will go back to policy, correct?
no,
This
there's
is policy, and it goes back to the full board on Tuesday. It'll go back to the full board on Tuesday.
So this doesn't go back to operations?
No,
there's no reason for it to go back to operations. Because operations made the recommendation to the full board already.
If you don't change it, or didn't accept it.
Yeah, we're keeping it as operations made the original recommendation. We're not making any adjustments. Okay. Does anybody have anything else on OE8 that we need to touch on?
so are you going to, so for future topics, are we going to take OE8 and for a lack of a better word, reduce it, modify it, condense it, all of those things that you talked about that you all had issues. Is this a future topic to come back and relook at OE8 to make some modifications? Specifically like to section 2.
No, my take on it was when I pulled it off consent agenda, and I just wanted to make a point that we needed, when these OEs came up, that we needed to make sure that we had actually looked at, had monitored the OEs. I was in support of voting to approve OE8 at that point, just with the caveat. And then the RFP thing, and then the secure thing, and Colonel Geyer said it should go to policy. So from my point of view, I don't think we need to do anything with OE8 at this point. But I think the reason it's a discussion to have in policy is to say we really need to kind of, with all the new board members, make sure we're monitoring the OEs and we're looking at the indicators.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think OE8 will have to come back to the full board for final not seal approval in regard to the language, but the monitoring report, excuse me, will need to come forward for OE8.
In terms of discussing the federal, in terms of the use of facilities for federals, now that part would need to go back to the full, would need to go to the full board as well.
That is gonna come out in my report, but I don't believe there was any recommendations from the committee for changes to the policy.
Right.
So it'll be in my report about our discussion on it, that we looked at the AR. We talked about how it's presently being done, what's the standard of practice right now, but that we didn't make any modifications to our board policy. Is that correct, committee members?
It sounds right to me.
So can I just ask a question then? For this particular document that's being shown now, was our only edit to add the word secure?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Yes.
Okay, and where does, in what committee does the discussion of the actual metrics that are to be reviewed and tracked? Is that in the results committee?
Operations.
Operations?
Yeah. So this would typically come through at the committee level when they're doing the monitoring of, when the administration brings forward their monitoring report of facilities, and committee level operations would look at it, and then it would come forward to the full board. And that's what did happen already. It came forward, or it came out of committee, went to the full board. Ms. Boatwright and myself both had some concerns about the data that was presented in that report to support compliance. And so then that's when it kind of got bounced back to committee.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not my decision to send it to policy committee, but I think it was just a variety of things to take a look at it. I know that I do think too, at some point should be looked at. I mean, it's one of those things we just, cut and paste from another school district. And it, in my opinion, doesn't really align with this district that well. And I think that there could be a conversation, but what would happen? So Mr. Dalton, this is how I think it's supposed to happen. Operations committee could look at it, decide that it didn't really align, and make a recommendation that would then come to policy to be officially voted in. Right, Dr. Wisniewski?
Yeah, and I think that my understanding of why it is the way it is because there's multiple different methods that are standardized across school districts and used. We might use one right now, but these expectations that the board set, there could be, Mr. Otting, I have much respect for you, but there could be someone else in his seat in 5 years. And so it's all encompassing essentially in terms of what we can use and what is available to us, what we might choose to use, and what then would be the triggered mechanism for reporting to the board, or what the board's responsibility is.
And I know this meeting's going on longer than you like, Dr. Wisniewski. I can totally relate. However, one of my questions is, why would we have a policy for what could potentially at some point come? You know what I mean? Like, because how do we monitor that if we're not doing it? I mean, I guess the monitoring would be NA, because it's something that we're at. So it just seems to me that policies should really focus on how we're doing things now and how we want things done in the future, and not sort of, because that's where I think we get in trouble on the monitoring. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen an indefinite delivery monitoring report.
No.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is the monitoring report that came through operations, and this is the document that we're talking about. So this is what was taken out, came to policy. So does this go back now to the full board for acceptance, since you all did not accept it and we were changing the OE?
Scroll down, will you, Robin?
Where am I going?
Okay.
Right there?
Okay, so the monitoring indicators are provided below for each component. Okay, that I would like, I'll go back and look at that. That's in board docs?
Yes. This was in the operations. It's the February
13th, right?
Okay.
13th meeting,
It's 14.
14th, February 14th.
So, yeah, I mean, that's
And
one of
then
the things I need
And that
clarification.
went to the full board at that next meeting. Yeah,
So my point at the time, Robert, was, or Mr. Auding, was that we've never talked about enrollment. We've got Pritchardville with 10 mobiles, and I know it's the referendum. So my point was, you can say, here's our capacity. This school's at 52%, but we're going to keep it going. This school's got 160%, and we're addressing it because we're going to build a new school with the referendum, and we're going to, whatever it is. But we never had any discussion about it. So what the monitoring indicator is, and I don't know if you can scroll down, Robin, I don't have that pulled up, but the monitoring indicator can't just be see the CIP. I don't know if that's what it is. But there was never any discussion about enrollment or attendance realignment or anything like that.
Yeah, it was more of a narrative as opposed to here's where you can find the data, or here's the report with the data.
Here's our report, here's the data, here's our recommendation based on board policy. And that gives an opportunity for somebody to say, well, wait a second, what are we doing about this, that, and the other? So my point, and just to, like Dr. Wisniewski just said much better than I did, but it gets to sort of, we have the data over here, but go, there, and there's sort of a story about it, but we're not having those discussions. And it's really more on the board than anything else. Is I want the district to make sure that they're compliant with the monitoring indicators. And I want to go back and look at that and see exactly what that is. And then we should have a discussion about it before we approve everything. But I think when we went to this, the full OE at one whack type of thing, that we got kind of casual about the subsections.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's on the board. That's not on the staff.
I'd agree with that. See, it's punched out there.
Where is it punched out?
Number 2, the formatting, where it's got construction manager at risk on its own. It's C.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was
yeah.
a format. It was, and the,
Yeah. Okay.
The
Good
guy
eye.
formatted that way, but yeah.
You figured it out.
I
Rob.
Wisniewski flies again.
It's that eagle eye. All right, y'all. Well, let me
So what needs to be done to move this forward?
It's got to go back to operations on the request of Colonel Geyer. And I think it had just about, I don't think it has any, because I said at the time that I was going to go ahead and approve OE8, but I wanted to make the point that we needed to do a strong work. He's the one that said to go to policy and then back to operations. But I don't have anything at this point that we need to change from my point of view. I just think going forward, all around, we need to tighten it up.
So this was approved or not approved by the full board when it was brought forward?
It was not, because Colonel Geyer recommended it go to policy and then back to operations. And I just said, okay.
So then has it gone to operations again?
No, it's going to go to policy and then back to operations.
Policy, then operations. Okay, well, I'm going to tell Colonel Geyer it's back on his lap.
And we added the word secure.
And we added, we're going to request that the board support that.
Okay.
Okay.
and that's it. That's in the actual OE.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the part that I thought that went back to policy was the actual OE. I didn't understand that this monitoring report came to policy. I thought the OE itself came to policy.
Yeah, no, I
would have thought made sense.
Yeah, I didn't think
We should
that the
recommend-
monitoring report came to policy. I thought it was the OE itself because it was the actual policy.
Yeah, I just kind of went along with it, but my point when I pulled it off consent agenda and wanted to talk about it was that we needed, if we're gonna do all these OEs, like we're doing them, we need to have the data and the monitoring reports attached, and we need to have those conversations. So I don't know, I think maybe the RFP thing, and because there wasn't a list of RFPs that was monitored, and then this adding of the word secure, but yeah, it kind of gives me a head.
I will remind Colonel Geyer that it should be in operations now for any changes that they want to make to the OE itself. And we'll see where it goes from there.
Question, correction. So for clarification, the OE itself came to policy where we added the word secure. That's the actual policy. So that goes back to the full board. That does not go back to operations.
Correct.
I just read the transcript.
The monitoring report that we have up on screen now, that Robert made his report to operations, went to the full board, was pulled off consent because of questions. So now this monitoring report goes back to operations
Yes.
because there was additional information you all wanted out of operations. Am I saying that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the OE itself does not go back. The OE,
No, the OE's monitoring report. OE
yeah, the OE monitoring report, this report here goes back to operations. Got it.
Yes.
So if I can add one quick thing, so I guess I'll wait to hear from the operations committee, what needs to be done with this report. I will say, Ms. Boatwright, I hope you've noticed that the RFPs now are always part of the construction update. So every time we get a construction update now, we give an RFP update as well, so.
And I hope, Mr. Ani, you understand that this was just me making a point in a meeting in general about our OEs and trying to get back. So, and then it was decided it would go to policy. And so I just kind of I came along for the ride. Because I think, I've been on operations for 2 years, and I think, you guys are very transparent and thorough. But I think the board has gotten, now we put the whole OE on the consent agenda, and we didn't have any of those conversations. And I think that is a bad precedent going forward.
And I saw the operations committee, so I can relate it to Colonel Guy that was unfair here.
And maybe Rachel, in your report, you could say something like, we discussed the need to make sure that we have all the monitoring indicators. I don't know. It's just, that was just my point.
Yeah.
And then I thought we would talk, it came to policy, so.
It'll be a nice long report. All right. So let's move on to future topics. The only two that I have are that the placement of the points of celebration needs to be discussed in regard to the handbook. So we'll have a copy of the handbook at the next one in board docs, and we'll place that accordingly. And then the only other one that came to mind is that we have had a lot of discussion, and I'm sure you all are well aware of this, in regard to the book review AR and the forms and things like that. But I believe Ms. Boatwright and I both went back and forth on, do we have a board policy? Do we not have a board policy? Where is this, where's the umbrella? So basically, I think we just need to find where would be the best place to say that that is under the purview of the superintendent, basically giving that authority to the district. But we there may be a gray area in terms of what the board policy is, per Ms. Boatwright and myself.
We're talking about instructional materials.
Are we talking about curriculum? What are we talking about? So yes, I would just like to make sure that we review our board policies, clarify what our intentions are, and make sure that it is clear, black and white, in our policy, so that there's no misunderstandings. So those are my two items.
So to review board policies for book review for
No.
no review
For
board
library
policies
materials.
for the sake of reviewing board policies.
Library materials.
Okay.
I would even go broader and say materials outside of those specified as instructional materials.
supplemental, there's so many different words.
Supplemental, excellent.
Okay, supplemental materials policy. And we'll get into the weeds on that one, I'm sure, but I just want to make sure that we are very clear on that.
Review
Anybody
board policy for supplemental materials.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Anybody? Going once?
I am agenda itemed out here.
You are tapped out. I love it. Okay, well, if there is no disagreement, I'd like to call for adjournment of this meeting.
No disagreement. So moved.
Awesome. Thank you all for your time. I'm sorry that it was so long, but appreciate you all.